Ms Spence, welcome. Again, you've probably no prizes for guessing what I want to ask about. You would be aware I've been CC'd into the long string of emails that have flown between CASA and the Colour Vision Deficient Pilots Association since our last estimates hearing. It has raised a number of questions that I'd like to try and get some clarity on. Dr Manderson, in the last estimates, talked about the fact that there was concern about a lack of consistent standards across the board. Could I ask, for the CASA Flight Examiner's Handbook, is there a revision control on that actually controls the information that's put out to flight examiners across the country?
Senator Pip Spence, CEO and Director of Aviation Safety of CASA, yeah, we do have a control document system that would ensure that updates to the Flight Examiner Handbook are controlled.
Okay, so it was pointed out by the Colour Vision Deficient Pilots Association before your review took place that there was no section in that book for the operational test, which your predecessor had implemented in February of 2020. Why was their advice, in fact their offer to even draft that for you, not taken up?
Senator, we're actually working through that now. I can't answer why the offer wasn't taken up at the time, but what I can say is we see that that the sensible way is to get that more detailed advice and guidance on how to operate, how to actually take forward that test, because clearly that not being there created a significant issue in the way different examiners were applying the tests and the information that was coming through to us.
Okay, can I ask in comparison, does the DAME handbook for your aviation medical examiners, is it presented in a PDF type form with a revision control in the same way the flight operations book is?
We've introduced a clearer requirement around document control for the DAME handbook.
That's not quite the answer.
No, I know, Senator.
Tell me, has it to date been a consolidated book with revision control?
I'll pass on to...
Yeah. Senator Andreas Machuli, the Executive Manager for the Stakeholder Engagement Division, which includes AvMed. My understanding is that the document is available as a PDF. We publish it on our website as web pages for ease of review, but my understanding, which I can confirm, is that you can request a PDF copy and a PDF copy is available.
Okay, that's again not the answer to my question with respect. The revision control. Because even in our brief interaction in the last estimates, there were clearly updates on websites which you all said were not your policy, should not have been there, and they've now been removed. But I'm not aware of seeing any record of insertions, deletions, corrections. There is no revision control that I can perceive.
And Senator, I think you're correct. I can't say that there's never been anything, but what we have discovered is it doesn't follow, it hasn't recently at least followed the same processes that we have for our control documents. So that's a matter that Mr Mascheli has corrected.
Okay, so I'm a little confused then in that where we have, how many DAMEs are there in Australia?
800, give or take.
800, thank you. How many instructors were there who were doing the operational flight tests for colour vision deficient pilots?
I think around about the 25 mark.
I think there were around 20 authorised. How many actually conducted them?
I'd have to look that up.
I think you'll find it's less than 10.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Okay. So with the comments in last estimates about the degree of confusion about the operational test and that the lack of standardisation was leading to all that confusion, and there were only 8 people doing it, what efforts were made to take up the Colour Vision Deficient Pilots Association draft to actually provide the standardisation rather than just scrapping or suspending the whole test and disadvantaging a whole cohort of pilots within Australia?
Well, I think, Senator, we've been through this before. We did genuinely think that there was an issue that had to be addressed, and that's why the review was undertaken. I don't know what conversations led to not picking up the suggested manual that I think one of the chair of the Pilots Association came back to us with, but we are now looking to how do we provide that guidance. And even if there are only 8 who are doing it, I think the sensible thing is to have processes in place that anyone who wished to was able to. So that's the place that we would like to get to.
Sure, but my point is, if you're happy to have, how many, 800 doctors working to a manner that they deem is appropriate, even though it may or may not be up to date and accurate because you don't have revision control, you haven't suspended all aviation medicals, but you've opted to do that in a case where there are 8 people, and it was a process that is built on the US and the New Zealand process. I just see a big difference there.
Well,
and I'm wanting to draw you back to the comment that your original intent was to strengthen the test and standardise. Are you aware of the FOI document that was dated 17th of December 2021? That's when it was drafted. The internal discussion brief to CASA about OCVA and colour vision deficiency risk assessment?
I don't have it in front of me, Senator, no.
Okay, well, I'm happy to make a copy available to you. But are you aware of it is the question, yes.
I'm sorry, it's 10:15 at night and I really can't recall it at the moment, but I can check with my colleague if he's aware of it.
I'm not specifically aware of the document you're referring to. I know there was documents released under FOI, but which one?
Well,
one
it's quite significant because what the committee was told in October last year was that you were concerned about the lack of standardisation. You thought the operational test was a good thing and that you would be looking into it to strengthen it. Dr Manderson did make some comments then about some of these gaps as to hows and whys. But what this FOI document shows is that not long after the previous Director of Aviation Safety departed, the AvMed area of CASA under the Deputy had a working group and it went for 1 month in October 2021 and came up with this discussion brief which basically says the whole concept of an operational test, removing restrictions, is not valid. They don't agree with it from a medical perspective. It should be removed. Pilots, 4 pages of quite significant rebuttal highlighting all the things that have started to unfold, and yet you're trying to tell the committee that you had no idea that this brief had been written by AvMed.
Sorry, Senator, I probably wouldn't have seen. I genuinely can't recall the brief that you're talking about. But I can say is what the evidence that's being presented to the committee that we've discussed with the CVDA pilots and that we briefed you on separately is correct. We don't intentionally mislead this committee. We take our responsibilities very seriously. We had genuine concerns based on the responses that we were provided from the tests that had been taken, whether it was the right path to do a follow-up review. I genuinely, on hindsight's a wonderful thing. I'm not 100% sure that it was, but we are where we are and we're trying to formalise arrangements that haven't been formalised previously in a way that provides sufficient justification for Australia to differentiate itself so significantly from the vast majority of states who are a member of the International Civil Aviation Organisation.
Okay. So how many differences do we file with ICAO at the moment?
We file many differences with ICAO, but we always back it up with evidence, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment.
Sure. So my concern is the people who are pushing for this change, who wrote this brief, include in it paragraphs that say, and I'm quoting here, there is an assumption following a pass on the OCVA that the absence of air incidents has been an indication that colour vision endorsements are unnecessary, rather than the alternate assumption that the paucity of air incidents to date is due to the application of appropriate colour vision controls by the way of certain conditions on medical certificates.
Senator, all I can say is this does bring up very strong feelings from different members of the medical community. We are trying to work our way through this methodically so that we can document an outcome which, as I said, is replicable and allows for both the clinical tests and an operational test that can be repeated. This is where we want to get to, and then form that, ensure that that's formally captured through appropriate regulatory structures.
Ms. Spence, if I could just point out the logic fault in this in that the position Australia adopted in February 2020 was aligned with the FAA and with the New Zealand authority. Do you know how many pilots there are in America, licensed pilots flying?
Senator, the issue, I mean, we've got two issues.
No, Ms Spence, sorry. I'm asking you a question.
No, I don't, Senator.
Okay, it's around 620,000, about 110,000 commercial pilots. They've had the system operating for a number of years with no incidents. And yet the assertion here is that because Australia has done this for a couple of years without incident, that we must be on the wrong path, and yet the US has been doing it for years. So I'm just saying that the whole premise behind this paper
Senator,
is on flawed logic.
And, Senator, that paper is not the basis on which we are going forward. The issue that we raised, which we've briefed you on separately, was the issues that we had with the operationalisation of the OCVA and what we're trying to do to address that. So I might refer to my colleague.
Senator, if I could just say, one of the things that we've really taken very seriously is the instability and the uncertainty about how this issue has been treated. So to avoid the situation that you're recounting where changes were made from different areas, perhaps in an unstructured way, what we're proposing to do is settle the policy forward through a regulatory process that actually puts a position out for consultation over the next probably 6 weeks. And we create a legislative instrument that captures how we treat colour vision in a way that's transparent and open, subject to review and scrutiny, so that we don't end up in the situation that you're talking about where people have instability and uncertainty. So I think, as Ms Spence said, the paper you've got in front of you is not CASA's position. That's an internal discussion paper that some members of our medical community might have had, but we're taking it forward from a whole of CASA perspective that includes input from our operational areas, our flying standards areas and our medical areas, and we intend to consult publicly to create stability.
I'm pleased to hear that, but this may have only been a discussion paper, but it did start until October last year to have material impact on pilots and their professions and their ability to operate, because it was starting to be operationalised clearly without an internal review and approval process.
And we're addressing that now, Senator.
Okay, can we just come back then? I accept what you're saying and I welcome that, a good strong process. But can we go back to the basis of principle? The whole discussion started with the fact that you believed that the operational test was a valid way to move forward as a third level of testing, and both yourself, I believe, and Dr Manderson made the comment that should a pilot pass that operational test without any issues, they would be issued an aviation medical certificate without condition, note, restriction, endorsement, etc. Is that still your principled position, that you are seeking to find the evidence to work towards?
We're working our way through that and will be the basis for a discussion paper, as Mr Marcelli mentioned before. So, you know, there is that is the intention. I don't think we've moved away from that, but we just need to make sure that we can actually turn the principle into a deliverable outcome.
If you decide you can't, you've highlighted in the evidence you've provided that there's been close dialogue with both the New Zealanders and the FAA.
Yeah.
Have they indicated that they will change their position if you don't believe that you can reach that point?
I think our issue is more around how we come up with a repeatable test, but at this stage we haven't had any conversations with the FAA or New Zealand to suggest that they would move away from their positions. But again, we can take on notice if there has been any feedback along those lines.
So if you don't believe you can come up with a repeatable operational test that satisfies your safety requirements, does that mean there'll be a flow and impact where you will stop any pilots that are licensed by the FAA?
You're asking us to make assessments about something that hasn't actually happened yet, so I'd rather let us get through the process we're working through before we guess what happens after that.
It is the logical extension of your argument, though.
I'm talking about what we're actually going to be consulting on. If, as a result of the consultation, we find ourselves unable to progress the way that we've been discussing, then we will be open and transparent about what our next steps are. But I can't talk. I don't know what other countries will do in response to anything that we do either.
Sure. Just in terms of the third level of testing, My understanding is that the FOI department of CASA has confirmed that there is no documentation that approves or justifies the use of the CAD as a third level of test.
Yes, Senator. So we've been going through this in some detail since we last appeared before the committee and since we met with you. And the CAD test has been used by CASA from around about the 2014 mark. In our review, we haven't been able to identify clear evidence for how that test was deemed to be a test. So that's part of the process that we're working through now. So
has that now been suspended?
So it has been. Well, let me wind back a bit. So the way the regulations work for colour vision is they prescribe 2 clinical tests, and if you don't pass the 2 clinical tests, there can be a third test that CASA determines. So it's that determination that we haven't been able to identify clear evidence for. There is a separate part of the regulations that say CASA can apply any test to inform flexible certification. So we are using the CAD test to inform flexible decisions for people that are presenting right now, but we're not treating that test right now as a test.
Given there's no...
Sorry, Senator Fawcett, I'm not going to stop you. I know the rules. We do have an arrangement with the committee that we're going to get through everyone. I can't stop you.
Two more questions.
Thank you. We are finishing at 11.
Sure. Given that in the AAT hearing for one pilot, the designer of the CAD test gave evidence in that hearing that it was never intended to be an operational test. In fact, he failed to see how it could be used as such. It's met stiff opposition from the pilot community that are subject to it, and now you have no documented evidence for its use. Why are you continuing to use that test, and yet you have suspended the OCVA, which like-minded nations such as New Zealand and the United States use very similar form tests as valid operational third-level testing? Why the difference?
Just to clarify, we have actually undertaken a test since all of this happened. So to suggest that we've suspended and making impossible for people and forcing people down CAD is incorrect. But the whole point that we're talking about is the consultation is to go out, engage with the pilot community around the CAD as well as an operational test along the lines of OCVA. And from that we can work out what the pathway forward, and it may include two third-tier tests as part of the colour vision deficiency process, but we'll work our way through that. And obviously we'll invite the CVD pilots to provide any feedback that they wish to around all options that are on the table.
Sure. To keep faith with the Chair, this will be my last question then.
Sorry, Senator, just really briefly, the CAD test is a test that's accepted by the UK and adopted by the UK, so just as other jurisdictions have operational tests, that's the basis for our use of the CAD test, is the UK experience.
Well, so, then there are 2 that accept the OCVA, so why aren't we accepting that?
Yeah.
Your logic fails there, I'm afraid.
Well, the OCVA, Senator, just to be clear, what we've said, our biggest issue with the OCVA was not the test per se, it was the way in which it was actually being run through. And I appreciate your point around the guidance that had been offered to us, but that's part of the issue that we're trying to work our way through.
Sure. So my last question then is, can you please provide on notice details of your progression through leading to your legislative instrument, so that industry will have some understanding of the sort of time frame we're talking about, given that this was supposed to be resolved last year and we're now pushing into 2024. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much. And I do appreciate the work that you are doing towards resolving this.
Senator